close to it to make it easier for the guys up there. Okay. Do I need to turn this on, or what I need is, do I need to turn it on? Let me turn it on for you.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm not getting the vibe that you're here. Are you still at the party? Okay, I guess it's time for us to abandon the party for a bit and pay attention to today's session. So welcome to the third and final day of the African Investigative Journalism Conference 2023. Yeah, it feels like the party is ending too soon. We're on day 3 and yet we just feel like we were getting started. But today we also have a day full of insightful sessions, starting with the one that we're having today, this morning. But before we go to the session, let me just once again congratulate Tom Odula for his big win. Congratulations, Tom. I don't know if he's here. Okay. I guess if he hadn't come, we would all understand, right? Yeah, so Tom, welcome and congratulations again. You've come just in time. Yeah. So my role this morning is to introduce Professor Brant Houston, who is, he wears many hats. I don't know where I'll start. But for one, he is the chair of the Global Investigative Journalism Network's Board of Directors. He is a co-founder of the Global Investigative Journalism Network. Actually, it was a conversation between 3 of them. Or was it in a bar? It was in a bar, yes. A conversation between 3 of them in a bar that gave birth to... That's Denmark. Oh, that was in Denmark, yes. That gave birth to the Global Investigative... There were 2. In a bar in Denmark, and that gave birth to what we now know today as the Global Investigative Journalism Network. So when we have these evening activities, please make sure you turn up, because that's where some of the best ideas come from. Yeah. Brant is also the night chair of in investigative reporting at the University of Illinois. Have I pronounced that right? Yes. So for more than a decade, he was executive director of the Investigative Reporters and Editors, where he built its membership to more than 4,000. And before that, he worked as an award-winning investigative reporter and database editor at US newspapers. He was part of the staff at the Kansas City Star and won the Pulitzer Prize for its work on a hotel building collapse that killed 114 people, and wrote the first overview story of the survivors. Brant advises nonprofit newsrooms in the US and internationally. He is a co-author of Investigative Reporters Handbook and author of Computer-Assisted Reporting, a practical guide, which I think has helped shape data journalism as it is today, as we practice today, right? Yes, and he has served as a judge for editorial awards for the Society of Publishers in Asia Contest, the Selden Ring Award, the Philip May Award, Journalism Award, and the Forum for African Investigative Reporting, FAIR. Brant has had a close association with Africa, and that's why you see that he's always coming here constantly to support investigative reporting in Africa. And today's session is another demonstration of his commitment to supporting the AIJC and investigative journalism in Africa. So without taking any more time, please join me in welcoming Professor Brant Houston for his session on collaborative investigative reporting. Thank you.
Thanks. This work okay? Yeah. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad you all made it back from the party. And thanks for showing up early. The breakfast show is always a little shaky. I'm going to talk a lot about collaboration today. When I first started coming here, coming to South Africa, and I've also been in Nigeria, I saw lots of different groups working on really good stories, and my message was constantly work together. Data journalism makes it easy to work together. You have a common thread of information that you can work off of. I'm just really pleased to see this agenda for this. I don't know how many times the word collaboration is used. But today I want to talk a little bit about different kinds of collaborations, how things have evolved, and I'll give you the punchline to all this right now, which is we've gotten to the point where we work together well, we share information, we compete, but not too hard. We'd rather work for the story than against each other. We publish it, it gets republished, but I think we have one more stage in this sort of line of continuity. We've got to think about a systematic way of publishing our work and making sure it's widely distributed. And we need to think about monetizing it, that terrible word for some people. But I am a little worried that the foundations have us make sure that all information is free, and I'm just worried that Google or Yahoo is going to grab all our stuff again and make lots of money off of it, and we won't get any. So I just want us to think about how maybe we can publish together in a more systematic way. And so I'll sort of get to that point. I'm not going to go on for too long because Q&A is the best thing, and you still look pretty lively from last night, so I think we can have some back and forth. I always consider the presentations and networks as working together. I don't see things in hierarchies. I did some study of social networks earlier in my career, so I always see this horizontal network with one big set and then all these subsets. They're so cool that work together and form and reform depending on the story and the project. So the book is up here. This is the beginning of a whole new line of research for me. I ruined my summer last summer, 2 summers ago, working on this, but I really wanted to think about how we were changing and what elements were in there. And this is more US-centric, and I want to do one that's more international, but there's some things that are in the book that can be applied anywhere. And a couple of them have to do with the role of universities, of NGOs, advocacy groups, and how we all work together and don't lose our credibility. But that is a trend that is happening everywhere. And I think somehow we're going to have to maintain our ethics and credibility in the midst of all the disinformation. And I think if we remain fact-based and evidence-based, we're going to distinguish ourselves and we're going to attract the largest audience. So I just wanted to note this. I'm not selling the book. I'm just saying it's starting to give me an idea on how we move forward to our next stage. So let's see if I can technically get to the PowerPoint. Ta-da. Okay. See if I can turn this on. Is this on? No? Test.
Just in 1, 2.
There we go. All right. Thanks. Okay, so there are 2 threads here. There are networks and there are collaborations. And if we're going to move forward, we have to keep these 2 things in mind. And in fact, sometimes we have networks, sometimes we have collaborations, and sometimes we have networks that do collaborations. So I just want to kind of do an overview of where we are. So the mother of all networks at this point, the Global Investigative Network, I like this illustration that was done by the staff. It tells you all sorts of communications that happen when you're running a very active network. You have resources, you have help desk, you have training, you have publications. And so these are all elements, if you're going to set up a network, that you need to think about. And this is certainly not the only one. I was talking about sets and subsets. One of the subsets of the global network is all the African nonprofit newsrooms we have as members. So there's a nice little map on the site, and you can not only look at that, but you also can get a list of all the different organizations. Things have moved so rapidly, I think sometimes I and others don't just take a moment to go and say, look at this structure, look at what's happened. So you've got lots of different resources when you hit the newly designed webpage of the global network. Of course, you have other networks, international networks that everybody's a part of. You know, a long time ago, a bunch of us realized that local is global, global is local. It's hard to think of any local story that doesn't have a global element. You could look at the agenda for this conference and see how clear that is. So what do networks do? They provide contact and meetings. They establish credibility and ethical standards through membership criteria. They provide training, mentorship, educational resources, and of recent years, best business practices. It's one thing to do great journalism, but you have to stay in business. And so you'll see more and more things going in that direction. And sometimes the most important thing a network does, especially at a conference like this, it revitalizes you and it gives you the moral support you know to go back and do the really hard work. So what do editorial collaborations do? They expand expertise in reporting and distribution of stories. If you collaborate with somebody, you're going to save time and money. The key to good journalism is finding time, saving time, making time, so that's why a lot of people are happy to collaborate. They provide the potential, and there's a session after this one, for ongoing collaborative stories. I think the best thing can happen is we don't do one-offs. One of the first real investigative reporting network was Investigative Reporters and Editors. Just showing you the website. A lot of what happened after IRE formed in the mid-70s was replicated in many other countries. So you can see again educational resources. One of the organizations that came after IRE and was formed in a kind of a similar way as IRE, one of the members in the Informal Association of Journalists was killed, and that brought journalists together to form a Braji in Brazil. One of the principles of IRE was, because it lost a member in the early days, was if you kill one of us, you'll get 40. If you kill 40, you'll get 400. That's what a network tells authoritarian governments. The Swedish Association of Investigative Journalists was actually the first one after IRE. I'm showing you these because you can see the pattern. If you're thinking of forming some kind of network, the handbook is there. And then, of course, we have what's happened in Africa. We have lots of examples of people working together, crossing borders. This is the network right now. To me, this is the mother of all networks in Africa right now because it brings everybody together. And that's how the Global Investigative Network got going. It's first we were conferences, and then we decided we wanted to communicate between conferences more, and before we know it, we were forming a network. So networks and collaborations are studied. I don't know if anyone knows about this Center for Collaborative Journalism in the US, which actually does international work. If you want to keep up with collaborations that are happening across the world, this is a really good one-stop place to get that knowledge. One of their leading people is now working at another organization, but she set the standards for figuring out how collaborations work best. Name is Sarah Stonebelly. So it's hard to read her tip sheet, so I went ahead and typed out, I think I only made one typo. So the collaboration models. She found that there is one, and it's a temporary get-together of a collaboration Co-creating, that means everyone reports and feeds into it. They're temporary and integrated. That's where organizations get together and actually form a organization of its own for the purpose of the story. Then there are ongoing and separate collaborations. That means they're ongoing, but they're two different publishers or two different broadcasters. They have two different staffs. I think those can get very difficult, especially when somebody changes jobs. Then there's ongoing creating. That's the best, I think. Ongoing and integrated in what they do. That's good. There's my typo today. Temporary and separate. So she found there were 6 different models if you're trying to figure out how to work with other people. I'm just going to breeze through a few things, just noting, if I had done this Google search back, 20 years ago, I would not have run across all the collaborations that are going on this continent and with other reporters in other continents. It is absolutely stellar and almost startling is how much we are doing now with collaborations. I was just looking at this climate change one. I like to leave PowerPoints behind me, so I'm not going to read this. Somebody can take a look at it. But I think when you get 1,000 journalists across Africa talking about the same kind of story or topic, you're doing pretty well. Then, of course, we have all these multinational collaborations going on. There are lots going on. I'm giving a shout to CCIJ. I'm involved with them, but also there'll be a really good panel later today on the collaborations, and particularly the work that's been done in Africa. And of course, this is just one of the many Africa and Asia collaborations going on. Again, we've got to be global in how we report on things. We are constantly having either allies or predators coming into wherever we live, particularly on the business side. We've got to be able to have contacts across the world to track these people and to show light upon them. We have lots of multinational collaborations going on. The Pulitzer Center is here. It has really expanded its work. If anybody is looking for possible assistance, subsidies, distribution, contact the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting. Now, Pulitzer Center is just doing incredible work. Also wanted to mention Africa and South America. I know from this conference people have gotten together and a lot of different stories have been produced. I'm just showing one particular one that I thought was terrific, called The Enslaved Land. And it looked at what was happening to workers in agriculture, and looked at particular crops in particular countries. So, has anyone seen this one? Has anyone raised your hand? I really commend this to you as a really good project to take a look at. So what do we have once you start working across borders with different people? You start a push for local networks. And so again, you need to get subsets going because you're not always going to be working with something like organization like ICIJ. There's a lot of stuff going on that is somewhat global, but you really need to be focused on creating some local networks of the news organizations. And one of the biggest things that's happened, as I mentioned earlier, is if you're working on document and data-driven stories, it really brings people together because you have a common core of information that you can slice and dice to your needs. So, you know, get your data skills up as much as you can. It'll make it easy to travel across borders and work with lots of other reporters. I've also noticed in my research that a lot of people are publishing stories or articles or research saying we need more collaborations in Africa. I don't think they're doing the same Google searches as me, but I wanted to note it. And this is yet another one. And last, I'll just end with a shout out for OCCRP, yet another multinational news organization that works with everybody really well and pulls in a lot of data. So at this point, I kind of want to open it up for questions, thoughts, how we move forward. We can do that? You want to? Okay, you say.
Okay, thank you, Brant. There's a lot that has been shared, and I'm sure you burning with a lot of questions as well. Do we have? Okay, but before we get to questions from the every one of you, I have a few of my own for Brant. The first one is, Africa is culturally diverse, with different countries also using different languages. Naturally, journalism sometimes is molded around those cultural and language divisions. What advice would you have for investigative journalists on the continent who are keen to do watchdog reporting that goes beyond those cultural and language divides?
What we found with the global network, where I don't know how many cultures and how many languages we have, what brings us together is the story. And I think if you've got a common ground in the story, then you can move forward together. I think we have to be really sensitive of the stories. We are, the autocrats are attempting to polarize us more and more. If you are at a global conference, and we had one here in 2017, I believe, you'll see how much we get together because we have these common goals. So, drop the fight at the door, come and dance together.
Okay, thank you. Then sometimes people start to collaborate, and then the relationships deteriorate. How can we ensure that when people get to collaborate, they will still stay friends? Are there some ground rules you want everyone to keep in mind before getting into these collaborations?
Yes, we don't have to reinvent this. Over time, a lot of collaborations have found out that there's certain rules of the road that you have. A number of the multinational organizations do a memo of understanding. This is what you're going to do, this is what I'll do. So you have a document to go back to. Does anyone do that? Anyone here on this? Yeah, we know we've done that. Yeah. In my book I have some examples of those. But I think it's really key to figure out who's doing what, have that agreed upon, knowing that you can be flexible. And then you always have to have the out clause. Contracts to me are not so much about getting together, it's about getting divorced. And so if you're not going to be able to work together, you need to have a smooth way out.
Okay, thank you. And then are there tools that you have found to be most resourceful in facilitating collaborative investigations?
There's so many out there. So many project ones. Somebody was using Airtable, that was Associated Press, on the Ukraine work, Asana, Basecamp. There are all the tools out there to work together. The software companies already came up with it because they had all these coders that they had to keep working on the same project. So those are some that I've seen. Okay,
thank you. Finally, from me, how do you take into account the legal framework of each country while doing collaborative investigations? How do we ensure that everybody is safe? Because different countries have different legal regimes and other dynamics.
I think when you're starting the collaboration, you're looking to the people in the collaboration. They're in that country. They already, if they're doing good investigative work, have come under scrutiny and come under fire. There are a lot of really good international media attorneys and their organizations that put out a lot of advice, but it's like any investigative project. It's in the preparation and the strategy and the planning that you can somewhat avoid this. But I want to bring up the fact that, especially with a lot of nonprofit newsrooms that are smaller, there's a concerted effort around the world to put us out of business by suing us falsely, but making us use up all of our insurance or all of our own funds to defend ourselves. So there's a real global movement now to set up a legal defense coalition. So we have to be aware of that. I know of 3 major examples where the story was absolutely solid, done by a news organization. And in one case, there was the Center for Public Integrity. They got a summary judgment against oligarchs, and they could not get insured for another 5 years after that. They'd set up their own fund, simply because the oligarchs had attacked them so well in court that the oligarchs could have not really have a case, but they could kill them with legal expenses. So I'm glad you brought it up because it's something that's in the forefront of everyone's mind now.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Now we can have questions from the floor. If you have a question, please raise your hand and then we can just pass the mic over to you as quickly as possible.
Stunned silence.
A room full of journalists without questions.
It's okay, I teach. And the new generations of students look at you and stare unless you're a video, so it's fine.
Hi. I was wondering if you could give us some examples of topics that are interesting for journalists to explore when they're trying to come up with ideas of collaborations. I think corruption and politics are often topics that we see a lot in these big collaboration programs, but as a journalist who covers health and environment, I was wondering how you can approach those different topics when you're doing a collaboration.
Well, I think you need to think about how you're going to break new ground on it, and you make sure you've seen what's been written before. But everyone who's worked with me the past 10 years knows my one-word answer is food. I think more than ever that that's a topic that we're working together on more and more. It leads to health, environment, and the other reporting. I don't think we're covering commodities traders well enough. They can create a famine, and they don't. There's no accountability for them. So if I was making a plug for a particular story today, and there's been a couple of really good books out recently, and one of the chapters is about agriculture. So anyway, that's my pitch today. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, I have one question too. So
Okay.
you're talking about sustainability, and I think that's one key aspect when we're talking about lots of journalists working together. Lots of the centers are nowadays non-profit. So what would be your top recommendations to keep all the centers sustainable and thriving so that we can continue having collaborations?
Did I plant that question? Bailing me out, Amy. So anyway, in the sustainability. So the model of journalism around the world is becoming more and more nonprofit. Traditional nonprofit or foundation support, we wouldn't be around without the foundations. That's one key revenue source. What we really want to get to, though, is to get back to people having the idea that they might actually pay for news and investigations. When the web came along, we had a lot of editors who didn't understand what was happening, and they gave everything away for free, and I had to listen to all the software people saying, information wants to be free, man. Yeah, well, it costs to produce this. So I think we need to think about varied revenue streams now. We need to think about either memberships or subscriptions that don't cut people out. A lot of the news can be free, but we can still do that. We just need to think about different ones for sustainability. And I'm really hoping that people will get into the mood again of paying some amount of money. I'm hopeful that Substack, has anybody looked at Substack? Anybody here? I would take a look at it because there are a lot, it's sort of the sophisticated, more systematic blogs. And there's some terrific ones on Substack. And they found the price point, at least in the US, which is $5 a month, which is so much less than any kind of newspaper or news organization in the US. So take a look at Substack. A lot of it gets given away for free, and then if you like it, you can easily pay $5 a month for it. You know, or you don't have to pay for it. And I think that's getting us toward a model, more model of sustainability. We need a lot more funders, and people are working on that. But we've got to come up with different sources of revenue. The last thing I'll say about it, I ran investigative reporters and editors for partly and completely for 14 years. And I always had in my mind when I got up in the morning, do I still have 7 revenue streams today? And those could be conferences or training or publications, whatever, membership, but do I have 7 streams? Because when one dries up or 2 dries up, I still want to be here. So I'm thinking a lot about this, because we've got to come up with different revenue streams than just donations.
Okay, question from the back bench.
Okay. I've noticed that there's been a lot of intimidation on journalists when they're carrying out investigations in some countries, and we've seen a new wave of self-censorship. So I'd like to know your views on that. How can journalists regain their boldness and confidence to carry out investigations without gagging themselves?
So this goes back to the idea of collaborations and co-publishing. I noticed a lot of it, or Emmy was in Latin America. There's sometimes you publish without a byline, or sometimes you give the story to somebody else. There are times that we can be bold, but I've always told journalists, you want to be around for the long haul, and there are very few stories that are worth being your last story. So one of the advantages of collaborations is that you can cross-publish. I think that's happening more in the Caribbean, because in a small island, you do one hard story, no one will talk to you. So give it to another island, and then when they have a problem that they'll be excoriated, then you do the story because you don't have to live on the island. I think those kinds of things are happening. The other is people have gotten realistic. Sometimes you leave the country and still report on it. Russia in particular doesn't really like that very much. They're actually going after people outside the country. But you have to make a risk judgment. There are a lot of organizations out there to talk about safety. But I do think the collaboration has allowed us to get the information out at a lower personal risk. Anything else?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes, je vais parler en français. Merci. Merci pour tout ce que vous avez partagé avec nous depuis ce matin. Je suis Philomène, je viens du Cameroun. J'ai eu récemment quelques expériences de travail collaboratif et je trouve que c'est très intéressant et enrichissant de travailler de cette manière. Mais sur le plan humain, je trouve que c'est un peu compliqué parce que quand on vient de différentes rédactions, on n'a pas toujours la même façon de voir les choses. Et il est arrivé aussi que nous ayons certains conflits en ce qui concerne l'engagement, au niveau d'engagement des différentes personnes qui interviennent dans le groupe de collaboration. Et je voudrais savoir comment gérer certains aspects. Un exemple, vous commencez un travail collaboratif et puis tout le monde n'est pas engagé et à un moment donné, il y en a par exemple qui quittent le bateau, mais vous avez déjà travaillé, vous avez déjà commencé certains éléments ensemble. Comment est-ce qu'on gère cela, peut-être en termes de signature des sujets à la fin? L'autre aspect aussi, c'est est-ce que la collaboration peut justement engager des problèmes de droit d'auteur? Donc voilà les questions que je souhaitais vous poser. Merci.
I think we have all understood, right?
Yep. Okay, problems with collaboration. Again, I'm going to go back to the idea of starting out with the rules of the road and being realistic about collaboration. I've been involved in collaborations where somebody no longer believed in the story and they need to walk, so walk. But make sure you have that arranged beforehand. A lot of collaborations are based on trust. So as you're getting into collaboration, make sure you at least have some established criteria and ground rules for it. It is not unusual for someone to get busy, get sick, or get sick of the story. You have to be prepared for that. So again, it's in the planning, which is what investigative reporting is all about. It's when you take the time that you take your breath and say, I am actually going to think about how this story is going to be done and why I'm doing it and what the impact is. And if I'm collaborating with people, you need to make sure you have standards. If you're going to engage in a collaboration, I would say talk to people at ICIJ, at the Organized Crime Reporting, OCCRP, Pulitzer Center. These are people that have worked really hard to establish the best plan for collaborations. and they've got great ground rules, so we don't have to reinvent it. But again, it begins with trust, find your common ground. And again, have the exit clause. Things don't always work out. Sometimes you can be on a story that just doesn't work out or really, really changes. So be prepared for that. That's what I would say. You're not getting into a collaboration to have a fight. You know, you can do that with a family member. So, okay.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
No questions? That's fine. Okay, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
What would you say have been some of the biggest challenges for yourself around collaborations? Like, and how did you overcome them?
What kind?
Collaborations, and like the biggest challenges that you've found.
In collaborations in general?
Yeah, in collaborations in
People. No, but I mean, I think it's, you know, once everyone has the same mind about the story and the goal, you will eliminate some of the problems that come up. You know, part of getting through life is getting along with people you don't really like, right? And that can be in a newsroom, but particularly in a collaboration. You don't have to love who you're working with, but you have to have respect, trust. The big challenges is, I think the hardest challenge is when, say you're working with 5 people, a rather smaller collaboration. I think the toughest thing is when one of the people suddenly doesn't believe in the story. And you really have to have the out clause, because if it really goes badly, you now have a critic who's been inside the story. And now you have a whole nother issue to deal with. So again, you know, taking it slow and getting into the collaboration is good. Not being surprised if things don't work out and don't getting upset about it, because you do have the exit clause. I think a lot of people think, okay, we all agree on the story. And, you know, the first days of investigative stories are generally wonderful because you're learning and you're seeing all this stuff and it's exciting, and you haven't read the same thing 10 times over. But eventually you get to the middle age of the collaboration, and that's when things can get more difficult. But I would say that's the internal strife can kill you, and that's why you have to take your time getting in. So, and anybody can share their advice here. I mean, I'm just a collector, an aggregator. Anything else?
Yeah, there's a question at the back from an Africa editor for the Center for Collaborative Investigative Journalism.
Thank you very much, Brian. My name is Ajibola Hamzat, and I work for CCIJ. And thank you, Brian, for your presentation. Very great one. I lead investigative projects in West Africa. I try to get journalists to collaborate, and I know the kind of challenge that I face in getting that done. And one thing I notice is that for as long as newsrooms, media organizations are operating on the logic of profit, it's always very difficult for them to ask them to work together, because everybody's, I mean, it's a competition. The first word is competition, not collaboration. So I'm wondering whether you have some kind of magic word I can be using. Thank you.
I work with a really good economist periodically that studies news and the monetization of it. I think the first magic wand that hit in the U.S. and Western Europe was that the competitive newsrooms were dying in their current model. Sometimes the environment will take care of the difficulties in the competition. So the lack of resources started bringing people together, and then they realized their stories were much better. They started showing those stories to other people. But there are a lot of people in this room that could give advice on juggling the different interests and the competition and so forth. And Ron's from Associated Press, and that's quite a gang of newsrooms that compete with each other quite often, but there are lots of collaborations going there. But the magic wand is probably financial initially. You can compete till you destroy each other. What was the point of that? So but showing people examples of how much better a story was when people worked on it together, I think that's what we all judge, is how good was this story and how did somebody get that story and how can I do one like that? So, yeah. So, Jeff, yeah.
Thank you very much, Brant, for your presentation and for all your contributions to our community and to CCIJ in particular. I just wanted to share, we collaborate together when you were at Urbana-Champaign and I was at the Spanish language newspaper, and we had one bumpy patch where we had sent out a bunch of FOIAs to a local community without consulting enough on your side. But one thing that you said at that point, which I thought was really helpful, was you said, it looks like we have to communicate more now for a while rather than less. And so in addition to that out clause, I thought that that was one where when we had kind of gone forward without consulting enough on your side, and it was, okay, well, let's put more communication measures in place in addition to the point that you made about having an out clause and talking that through on the front end. So that was one of many things I've learned from you. I just wanted to mention that from a dozen years ago.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That was a great project and it won awards. But I found, because, and this sounds silly, we were in two different cities and we were all moving fast, that it's sort of like if you're an executive director working for a board. Does anyone know what the phrase is to keep in mind? No surprises. And that's really important in collaboration. You don't want to surprise people. And it's easy to do it in a collaboration. I realized in that one, I was assuming we were just 2 hours away, that we were reading each other's minds. And we realized suddenly we had to do a weekly memo saying this is what we're doing next week. You know, we knew each other. We thought we were totally in sync. So it's a really good point that you have routine communications and expectations of just knowing what's going on, not to interfere with it, just a heads up. What happened was the police chief got really angry at us, and we didn't even know what he was talking about. So, oh, that must have been Jeff. Talk to him. So, yeah.
Any question from somebody who is not from CCIJ?
And again, if anyone has to offer any wisdom here, please grab a microphone, because I look around this room and there's so much experience here on doing collaborative stories. And there's also setting up networks. And I really think every country should have a really good network around here, because you have common interests within the country and you need mutual support, and it's a way of curing destructive competition. Competition can be really good, but not the stuff that destroys other newsrooms. So if I can say anything else today, is think about doing these subsets of networks so that you get together periodically and share what's going on. It's also great for legal defenses, it's great for access issues, and it's great for safety, for personal safety. If there's one thing we've learned, it's safety in numbers. You can't you can't eliminate the reporter and eliminate the story. People know that. A lot of intimidation gets less, or lessened. Is that the sign to go? Yes. It's coming.
Thanks. Please interrupt me if I'm saying something that was said before, because I got here late because of traffic. Just saying that safety in numbers, still looking for safety, but we're trying to set up the network of African investigative reporters and editors with journalists now from over 20 countries, more than 30, and we're still very small and young and all that, but I'm already learning here a lot in 10 minutes. So if anybody is interested, they can talk to anyone. Yeah, Anas was here yesterday. I'm here. There's a number of other people from the network here. You want to know more, I can introduce you.
I highly encourage it. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Evelyn. Another, okay.
Thank you, but I will speak in French because my English is so poor.
It's better than our French.
Yes.
I'm a
Oui.
testament to a failed
Oui.
education in French.
En fait, moi, je n'ai pas de questions, mais je voulais quand même partager notre propre expérience. En fait, on a été dans une collaboration et donc pour nous, ça a très bien marché. Tout simplement parce que dès le début, on s'est fixé des objectifs. Ça marche pas?
I'm not getting translation.
Ça
Can
marche.
somebody translate for me? I don't know. There it is. Okay, got it. Got it.
Okay, thank you. Je disais que je n'ai pas particulièrement une question. Je voulais juste partager notre expérience. Et donc, nous, on a été dans une collaboration avec des journalistes européens. Et pour nous, ça a très bien marché. Tout simplement parce que dès le début, on s'est fixé des objectifs. Et en même temps, on s'est fixé des deadlines. On savait qui fait quoi, qui prend quoi et qui prend quoi. Et donc, comme on avait déjà fait tout ça dès le départ, et donc ça ne nous a pas posé assez de problèmes. Et donc, on a réussi à faire cette collaboration-là. Et ça a été très intéressant. Et c'est comme ça que je voulais partager cette expérience pour dire, si vous voulez faire du journalisme de collaboration, il faut dès le départ vous fixer des objectifs et savoir vous travailler sur les mêmes questions. Parce que vous ne pouvez pas être... vous êtes des journalistes qui travaillent par exemple sur les finances et il y a des journalistes qui travaillent sur l'environnement. Donc ça ne marchera pas. Donc vous devez avoir les mêmes objectifs, vous fixez des deadlines et je crois que ça peut marcher. Merci.
I think you just did a tip sheet. So I think that's exactly what we found. It's common goals, and I find it really helpful if people write it up. Did that make it through? Yeah. Okay. Anybody else?
You may
We
have
don't
to
have
switch on because you didn't have the mic.
Oh, sorry. Okay. Right. So I'll just repeat the question that she could do it, or response to her statement that she could certainly do a tip sheet that would help everybody getting into those. You have anybody else?
I'm just wondering whether, in your experience, you've seen people who are mostly targets of investigation when you've collaborated, also collaborating to try and work together to undo what your stories are exposing, or to try and just break up the collaborations. So, for example, in Kenya, we had cases against two politicians who are accused of causing violence, and they collaborated and won the presidency and used that to beat the cases at the ICC.
I have not had the up-close personal experience of that. I have lots of friends and colleagues who have. I think that we're under threat more than we have been before. I think as a U.S. journalist, I think U.S. journalists are experiencing more of this than they ever have before, and there's more common ground. But lots of different colleagues under threat, but this whole thing of going after the journalist and also using that as a way to get elected to further go after the journalist is a pattern we're seeing repeated across many countries. And again, that's why we have to stand together more than ever, because it's going to be a rough 10 years, I think, at least. And we've got to get used to combating this latest strategy. It's not only physical threats and legal threats, but actually government threats, people getting into government to use that as a force against the citizens and against journalists. I hope that addressed that. Okay.
Okay. Any other question? maybe as we wait for that, by show of hands, how many people have had successful collaborative investigations with media houses in the US? In Africa, how many people have had successful investigations with media houses, mainstream media houses in the US? Only one.
So how many people
two.
have worked with ICIJ out of the U.S.? Sorry, US-based. Okay.
Yes, the reason I ask that is to demonstrate that it's been difficult for African investigative journalists to have collaborations with mainstream media organizations in the US. And we don't know what we need to do to crack that code. So now that you're here, I think you could let us in on the secret.
Right, but I want to say something has really happened in the U.S. journalism. I think some of the elitism that came from being in monopolies has disappeared. And I think the people you want to work with from the U.S. are the newer nonprofit newsrooms who don't see hierarchy, they see equality and knowledge across different journalism organizations and countries. So again, something like the Pulitzer Center or ICIJ or what Jeff is doing with CCIJ, all these acronyms, I think it's much easier to go to some of the digital startups, which are really not startups anymore. They've been around for 15 years. They have great distribution systems. Lots of the media, other media uses it. Mainstream media, what you were talking about, is counting on that free content from nonprofit newsrooms more and more. You have Ron Nixon here, who's working in Associated Press and creates collaborations everywhere. Sometimes you don't even know who you're dealing with in the U.S. It's actually a U.S.-based newsroom. But the doors are open, and journalists in the U.S. are really, in these digital newsrooms, are so eager to work with you. And if somebody has a hard time, there's several of us you can call and say, what's going on with this newsroom? What's the matter with them? And we can tell you whether it's worth trying or not. I tell you, the digital startups initially had a lot of problems with the disappearing legacy media, who could not accept that they were no longer at the top of the heap. So we know what some of you have experienced, and the doors are wide open now. And I hope your doors are open too.
Thank you. Ron Nixon is with us. I'm sorry if I have to put you on the spot, but would you be able to share some insights with us?
He wants you to share your insights, Ron.
Because African investigative journalists have managed to do collaborations with the organizations in Europe. BBC Africa Eye is doing a lot of collaborations and a lot of others. But the US market has been difficult for us. Perhaps you could let us in on some insights.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for putting me on the spot there.
Sorry.
It's okay. So, I can't offer insights into the entire U.S. market. But I can offer insights to my organization, the Associated Press. We welcome collaboration. We work collaboratively with people across the world, and I've actually made contacts here. I think that the thing is, the projects need to be the right projects for everybody. The stories need to be the right stories for everybody. And I would also say that there are issues sometimes with communications, because I know that personally I have reached out to a number of folks and have never heard anything back in terms of potential collaborations. So, but always open to it. For those of you who don't know me, I'm a vice president for news at the Associated Press. I oversee the investigative teams, the enterprise team, and also oversee all partnerships with the Associated Press. So anyone who has a potential idea or wants to talk to me, I will be here. That's best insight that I can offer there. But mainly that we are open to collaboration, but it has to be the right projects for both organizations, though.
And I'll close with saying Amelia Diaz-Struck is here as the new leader of the Global Investigative Journalism Network. And I don't think we've done a really good count of all the productive collaborations that have come out by people getting in contact with each other, by getting involved and sending messages and reaching out to people and getting introductions through that network. And it's also happened here. So I just can't encourage you enough, because everybody doesn't know everybody. Simply putting out a query as anyone working on this particular topic in some kind of discussion group in one of those networks can get you 3 or 4 good collaborators. And also, you'll be able to check them out and see if they are credible folks. We're going to have to check out our collaborators more and more now, because we've got a lot of fake ones out there. So anyway, get involved in the networks. You'll end up doing a lot more stories that are of interest and that you'll enjoy.
Okay, thank you. And just to add, GIJN has a WhatsApp group for African journalists. We're about nearly 300 in number now. So if you're not part of that group and you want to join, please look for me and share with me your number, and I'll be able to add you to that group. Thank you, Brant, for all the insights that you have shared. Thanks, everybody, for the questions. And thank you, Ron, for sharing with us those insights as well. I think we can close here, but I think the networking and the collaborations, the conversations on collaborations will continue beyond this room. So thank you, everyone.
One last thing, one more round of applause for Anton on his way out. Thank you.
And a round of applause for Brant for his